My name is Joe Peroni, and this is the Rise Above Project. And today I want to talk about something that a lot of people are talking about, but I wanted to share a point of view for you today. Now, we're going to talk about Damar Hamlin. What happened with him, if you don't know, is that he's a Buffalo Bills football player, and he collapsed after a relatively routine football play on a Monday night game. And that game was between the Buffalo Bills and the Cincinnati Bengals. During that incident, he received CPR on the field and he was taken to the hospital in critical condition. And as an amazingly good thing, he seems to be making an excellent recovery, and I think everybody's happy about that. But what I want to talk about today is the way the media has been, and I also want to ask the question, does the handling of the Damar Hamlin incident illustrate an increase in empathy in the NFL specifically and in our country in general? Because at first glance, it seems like it might, because I've never seen a reaction like this before. Now, I'm not saying it's good or bad. I mean, obviously it was a horrific thing that happened, and I understand the way the reporters were, and the players and everything like that. That all makes sense. But it's, in terms of injuries, it's not unprecedented. That they keep saying, it's unprecedented, it's never happened. No, it does happen. Maybe not CPR on the field, that's true. But in terms of injuries, life or death situations on the field, yeah, it's all happened before. What's unprecedented is the way they reacted to it. And before we really get going today, I want to read this one part to make a slight point about, as I continue here. A student later identified by the Clark County Coroner's Office as 16-year-old Ashari Hughes. She was in the middle of a flag football game when she started experiencing chest problems. She had gone to the sidelines to rest when she collapsed. The staff immediately began providing medical aid and continued until paramedics arrived, but she did not survive. Okay, so this happened in Las Vegas just a couple of days ago. This 16-year-old girl died of a heart attack while playing flag football. Now, unfortunately, obviously, she didn't make it. Damar Hamlin is going to make it. And again, they act like this is unprecedented. These types of things don't happen. I was watching a game last night and everybody's wearing these I Love Damar shirts, and now both teams are going in the middle of the field and they're hugging and kissing each other and holding hands. And it's really an odd reaction because this isn't even football here. The injury that he had was in a football game, yes, but I don't think it was directly related to the football hit. Although you could say it was, yeah, but there might be something else involved there. But even then, it doesn't matter. The point being is that if you're not super famous, you're not going to get cared about that much in this country. And we're going to have this idolization of somebody who's famous or on TV. And that's what we're seeing right now. And that's just part of what I have to say. But again, watching these people on TV and social media, I haven't seen anybody have a dissenting opinion, except for one person, and I'll read his name, Jason Whitlock, which he had a lot of interesting things to say. But he's the only one that I could find that had a dissenting opinion here about how we're reacting towards this. So let's go over this, because in the beginning, again, the way they acted, the way the players reacted, which is totally normal. I mean, for sure, if you're watching a friend and somebody's doing CPR on them, guaranteed, that's a PTSD situation, for sure. And nobody's going to want to play after that. I get that. But let's talk about how this maybe was handled in the past as well. And I want to talk about the evidence of, is narcissism up or down? And what it'll show you is that almost every single piece of evidence we have will tell you that narcissism has increased and it's still on the rise. We also have an inability to see another person's point of view, and we are more entitled than we ever were. There's an increase in being outraged, offended, shaming other people, shutting other people up because they don't have the same point of view as you do. Am I seeing this here? It's virtually impossible for every single newscaster to think exactly the same. I doubt it. There's no way. Somebody, and the way the NFL works is that they're all told what to do and what to say at some level because they want to put out a certain type of product and they don't want to look like they're not empathetic, which is a complete change from the way it used to be. And going with the evidence again, our society, we're becoming less and less empathetic all the time. We have an increase in self-aggrandizing and choosing points of view to be popular. And they do this so they can seek attention. So a lot of this, again, people are afraid not to be able to get subscribers and followers and all these things. And they're afraid to lose their jobs, so they don't want to say anything that's not within the company lines. Some of the interesting things that some people in the media are saying, let's take a look at it to see if it's even truthful. One of the ones I heard was, and I'm quoting here, "This was the most horrific live sports moment of all time." Okay, let's go with that. I'm not the world's biggest racing car fan, but my father was. He was really into that. And if he was here right now, he would tell you that Dale Earnhardt died in the Daytona 500 on live TV, hit the wall, broke his skull. Okay, so why are these reporters pushing this now to act like this is something when it's not? It already is horrific, absolutely. But why the hyperbole? Why are they selling it the way it is? Continuing with that. The greatest Formula One driver of all time, Senna, he died in 1994 when he hit a wall. Okay, that was, millions of people saw that. Continuing, 1973, the Indy 500, there was a lot that went on there. So I'm going to read part of it, because I actually saw this on TV, and I saw it throughout the month, throughout the qualifications. What happened was that Sweet Savage had gone into the pits and he got a full tank of gas. He came out and he ended up hitting the wall and it turned into a fireball. So let's start with that. And it said Sweet Savage survived the initial impact, but he would die 33 days after the race due to complications. Here's the final toll for the month. 13 spectators were injured. 1 driver was seriously injured. 2 drivers died. 1 pit worker was dead. And I saw that on live TV too. Because one of the pit workers jumped out and somebody was trying to, get to the car accident, and they end up running that person over as well. That was also on TV. It said after the race, ABC's Chris Economaki called it, quote, a hard luck year for the Indianapolis 500. That makes sense. Except the fact that if Chris Economaki said it was a hard luck year, now he would be fired in a heartbeat, because he should have been crying and emoting and saying, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. And I'm not saying it's not, but you're a reporter. You're supposed to do your job. You're not supposed to eulogize people. You're not supposed to turn people off from the sport and of living and of doing their activities. This is a totally weird thing. To go off the subject slightly, one of the announcers or whatever that was describing the Hindenburg said, oh, the humanity. And he got fired for that. So this is a really strange path that we're going down. I'm not saying it's totally terrible. I'm just saying we have to admit that it's happening, that we're definitely silencing people who might have a different point of view. Right now we have to, and listen, I'm as liberal as the day is long, but now I can see why some of these conservatives are talking like this, about how they can't even watch a sports program right now without having woke culture hit them upside the head with telling them how to think. Because there's another way to think about this, and I'm going to show you some of that as well. And continuing with this, most people that I know saw Joe Theismann get his leg snapped in half. Now, it was horrible. You could say that that's not life-threatening. Okay, I would maybe choose to disagree. The fact that the bone shot through his leg and he was bleeding, I mean, it was one of the most disgusting, grotesque things in a football game you would ever see. The players were screaming to get somebody out on the field to end his pain, probably, to get him some type of help. But here's the thing. How did the announcers handle it back then? You couldn't see it that great on the first camera angle. So they used the reverse camera angle so you could get a better view of it. And they continued to show it. And then they showed it in slow motion. Again, is that good? I'm not saying it's good. But what I'm saying is our society changing? And why? Because again, somebody could say, well, it's because we care more and we're more empathetic as a society. Therefore, you wouldn't show that video. Right, but you would be wrong because there's no evidence to say that we have an empathetic society. It's something else. It's that we're becoming weaker and we're not, I don't know what the answer is, to be honest with you. That's why I'm doing the show. But there is a seismic societal shift, and it's not because we're getting more empathetic. That we know for sure. So again, continuing, Joe Theismann, horrific injury. 6 months ago, I went to the dentist's office, and one of the guys walking in, I recognized him. He still has a limp, by the way. Napoleon McCallum, played for the Raiders. His injury on Monday Night Football was so horrific. His leg was bent back so far that not only did it tear the tendons and ligaments and all that, but it ripped an artery. So was that life-threatening? Yes, because he was bleeding to death internally. What did they do with him? Carted him off the field. What people remember about that was, I think Jerry Rice set the touchdown record on that night. That was it. That's what they remember. It was a horrific play, but they moved on. Continuing, Drew Bledsoe got hit so hard by Mo Lewis that he had internal bleeding. He was dying on the sideline. They had to take him to the hospital. What do people remember about that game? Well, he was on the Patriots. When he got taken out because he was bleeding to death internally, Tom Brady went in to replace him. That's what we remember about that game. Again, why are the announcers so different? Were we reading Drew Bledsoe's eulogy while he was going to the hospital? Were we doing a vigil outside the hospital like I saw? And it's okay if you want to do a vigil outside a hospital of a football player who you think is hurt or might die. I don't have a problem with that. But there's a lot of people dying right now. Nobody did a vigil outside the hospital when my mother died. I don't remember that. And nobody else does either. And most normal people don't have a life like that. And how many other times with sports people are we doing this? This is a social media creation, maybe? I'm not sure. Continuing, Darryl Stingley was turned into a quadriplegic by Jack Tatum during a football game, a preseason game. It wasn't even a game that mattered. After the hit, he never apologized. He never even visited him in the hospital. They said that at some point, he said many years later that he tried to go to the hospital and he was unwanted, so he just left. But I'm not sure. But one of the quotes is that this is a football game. Like, it could have been me. What do you want me to do? Send him flowers? Like, I'm not saying that that's good either, but it's definitely a societal shift. And again, you can't say that we're more empathetic today because we're not. It's something else. It's more attention seeking. It's more that we can't handle life as it is. So we cry and complain about it all the time and we try to opt out. There's so many others, I can't even mention them. Again, let's say it real quick. Charles Hughes from the Detroit Lions, 1971. I was 6 years old. He did die on the field. I think he had an aneurysm. So again, you could say it's football because he was on the football field, but I don't know if football actually did it or not. I also watched Dooku Kim get killed by Ray Boom Boom Mancini in a boxing match. And a few days later, after Dooku Kim died, his mother, she committed suicide. So again, maybe we live in a society right now that we don't want to do sports, right? Like maybe we shouldn't have football. Maybe we should have just flag football. But then again, it goes back to what I told you before, that poor 16-year-old girl died of a heart attack this week in Las Vegas playing a flag football game. Maybe we shouldn't even have flag football. Maybe we shouldn't have boxing. Maybe we should cancel the UFC. Maybe we should cancel it all. Here's some more things I heard from these supposed reporters that are not really doing reporting anymore. This game is pointless after the injury. I don't care if the football game ever gets played or if we ever play football again. The player is more important than the game. Okay, we agree with all that. The player is always more important than the game. But that's why we send the player to the hospital, because as medical professionals, the people who are paid to play football and that are able-bodied and can still play, they should be playing football. What's the point of saying that? The player is more important than the game. Okay, so the game shouldn't be played ever? That makes no sense to anybody. It shouldn't. If you're not a doctor, then you shouldn't be around that player. You're of no use. Get back to your job. Here's something else that I heard that was really interesting. They said, let me read this. No decent game should have the need for a priest to talk to the players before the game. Let me tell you something. I started playing football when I was 8 years old. We always had a priest talk to us. I think when we were 8 years old, I don't think we actually had a locker room. But when we got older, we did. And it didn't matter if it was a locker room or not. But the priest would always speak to us. And I loved that because I was part of the community. We wore our colors. People from the community would watch us. There would be boosters. And I liked that too. And they had these little magazines of the different companies and small shops around town that was supporting the team. And somebody from St. Christopher's, usually Monsignor Lawler, would come to speak to us. I loved it. I felt I was part of the community. None of us thought that we were there because we were getting our last rites read, that we were going to die. That's not part of it. Are you kidding me? It's so stupid. It's the dumbest thing I ever heard. It's not like you have to have a priest at the game. We loved it. We wanted it. That's part of being part of your community. It's part of getting religion involved, which is, I don't think it's a bad thing, even if you're not into religion. It's nice to have somebody from your community support you. Like, what are you talking about right now? That sounds something like a reporter would write that's never played a game in their life. They need to be quiet. All they're trying to do is get social media followers and subscribers and everything else. It brings up a good question, though, I think. Again, I don't know the answers. I'm just going to throw out a lot of questions. Like, what's the proper action after an injury or a death during an event? Let's call it an event, whether it's sports or not. I don't know. Like, Brett Favre's father died on a Sunday. Less than 24 hours later, he played in a Monday Night Football game against the Chicago Bears and threw for 399 yards, one of the best games of his life. I'm sure if he said he didn't want to play, he wouldn't have got a lot of kickback on that. Like, they would have said, okay, we understand. But that's not the way typically athletes act. Understand, they get paid millions of dollars to do what they do. Don't ever let that slip your mind. When the Buffalo Bills and the Cincinnati Bengals the other day decided that they weren't going to play, they didn't all offer up their salaries that day. Some of them were getting paid over $400,000 per game. You got to remember that. They didn't say, oh, please take the check back, give that to charity. They didn't do that. They just said, I don't feel like playing. I'm in a bad mood. Really? You're in a bad mood. So is Brett Favre. So are a lot of people. In 2007, I was married. My wife died on a Friday. I went to work on Saturday. Why? Because there's no elf coming to me who's going to pay me for not working. I only get paid for the work that I do. And there's not another elf that's going to go to my mailbox and try to reroute all the bills that come in. Why? Because I'm a normal person. These football players get paid so much money that you have to understand, they have so much money that they would never have to work again. Their kids would never have to work again. Their kids would never have to work again. That's how much responsibility is being put on them. And yet we can get police officers and firemen and everybody else that have to go through their day-to-day things, feeling bad, watching deaths, seeing horrible things happen, doctors seeing things that they don't want to see, and they have to go to work every day. And football players go, oh, I can't. I'm feeling a little bad. You have to remember, when I go out on the field, I'm putting my life on the line for you. No, you don't. You chose it, okay? And here's the thing. Uber drivers have scarier jobs than football players do. The chance of dying while driving out on our streets are way higher than dying on a football field. But we have to praise famous people, right? So don't ever let that slip your mind of what we're talking about. If you want to have real empathy and you're a football player, here's the way you have empathy. Realize that these tickets sometimes cost about $300 a piece. You're going to get some poor person trying to take maybe their spouse and 2 kids to a game. It's going to cost them over $1,000 to go to that game. Maybe that's the only expenditure that they can afford all year. Maybe they traveled there from miles away. Maybe they had to get a hotel room. Maybe they had to get plane tickets to fly to go see that big game of the year. And you quit because you feel bad. What? Where's the empathy? The empathy should be for the thousands of people who support you. And people say, well, it's just a game. Yes, it's a game, but they get paid real money and real things happen. And these jobs do come from those games. There's therapists and there's psychologists and there's trainers and there's people who work at these, at the stadiums. Just the fact that Kansas City, right now, the Kansas City Chiefs are the #1 seed. Now, if it comes down to it and they have to play a championship game, it's going to be in a neutral site. How many millions of dollars is that city going to lose because a football player said, I'm just not feeling it right now? Do you have empathy for all those people? And let me make this a little clearer. Last time I looked, about 75% of the people in the United States live paycheck to paycheck. So there's a lot of people depending on that money to come in. But yet it's being pulled from their stadium now to a neutral site. And again, if it's only a game, but there's all these injuries happening, which is true that there is, why are they fighting for home field advantage? And it got displaced now, so you fought all year for home field advantage, but you don't get home field advantage because players decided, I'm not feeling it. I just don't feel right. Do you think all the players felt good when the Detroit Lions player died? However many of them throughout the year became quadriplegics throughout the years, people breaking their legs, people having internal bleeding injuries that were life-threatening. What's changed? When they say this is unprecedented, they are right, but it's unprecedented in our reaction to it. That is what's unprecedented. Let me take this a little bit out of sports, for example, because as you can see, I love The Who. I'm a big fan of The Who. June 27th, 2002, John Entwistle died, right before they were supposed to start a tour. You know what happened? They took off 4 days, and then they started their tour again. Why did they take off only 4 days? Because they needed to get another person to replace John Entwistle, the bass player. So in other words, you got to send the person a ticket, they got to get their equipment, they got to come in, they got to practice a little bit. So that's why it took 4 days. The actual decision to continue the tour took like 3 minutes. And there's a reason for that, because they're professionals, because they do their job. And somebody could say, oh my God, no, but this was somebody collapsed on a football field. His life is on the line. Yeah, in this instance, 2002, John Entwistle did die of a heart attack. His life wasn't in the balance, he died. And they were friends from like 8, 9 years old, all the way up to that point into their 50s. And they still made the decision to keep going. I don't want to say anything that I shouldn't say, so I'm just going to read it straight out. Peter Townsend, who's the principal writer and guitar player, he's right there and right there. This is what he said, quote, "I don't have much of a choice. I don't feel I know for certain that John would have wanted us to go on. However, I simply believe that we have a duty to go on, to ourselves, to the ticket buyers, to the promoters, big and small and little people, and I also have a duty to myself and to my dependent family and friends." Again, that's what having responsibility and accountability is all about. It's not a bad thing. A bunch of people didn't show up at the next Who concert and boo them for wanting to play. That's not what happens. So again, back to the original question. Are we seeing an empathetic societal shift in our country right now? The evidence doesn't show that. The evidence shows a lot of other things. It's not empathy that you're seeing. It's patheticism is what you're seeing. You're seeing people jumping on a social and emotional contagion to be popular, because who's going to say something bad about somebody who's in the hospital fighting for their life? Listen, we all want them to do well. We all do. But throughout the years, the show goes on, and people suck it up when they need to. That's where the difference is, where we've stopped doing that these days, and why we have special rules for famous people. They, more than anybody, should follow through on their responsibilities. Because there's people listening to me right now that are average, just like me. And something happens, you gotta go to work. You gotta do your job. And sometimes your job includes watching people die, talking to people right before they die. All of these things. Maybe you're the one who has to kill somebody. You're the one who needs to be praised. Not these football players who, I get it that they cry, but not playing games now? Now we're going to do that? I don't know, just a thought. What do you think? My name is Joe Peroni. This is the Rise Above Project. If any of this was interesting to you, please subscribe and tell a friend. Thank you.